Guys, how's it going? Thank you for stopping by. Today we're going to talk about Rolex. And I'm going to show you the models of Rolex that nobody wants. You might think once it has the Rolex name, everybody wants it. But you're mistaken. There's some of these Rolex that nobody wants, to buy them. And if you're lucky, they're worth their weight in gold. And these watches, if they're rare, it doesn't mean they're desirable. If there's only one or two that you can find for sale, that doesn't mean it's going to be worth a lot of money. And I see these watches on eBay, on Chrono, and people are asking outrageous amounts of money, and nobody's even looking at them. So basically, Rolex and the vintage world, if it's not an oyster case, it's a very hard sell. Very, very hard sell. And even bubble backs, because of their size, because of their 30 or 33 millimeter size on the bubble backs, depending on the era, they're getting harder and harder to sell. They're getting harder to find that particular collector that wants these kind of Rolex. So I'm going to show you the Rolex that you should stay away. And because if you're looking at a resale value, by the time you want to sell it to get your next watch, it's going to be very hard for you to get some part of your money back, all of your money back, like you're supposed to with Rolex. I mean, that's the reality of things. You buy a Rolex, you pay so much for it, and you expect to get 99% of that money back. That's why we buy Rolex, right? Value retention. So don't kid yourself. That's why we buy Rolex. So number one Rolex that has no desirability. Right here, dress Rolex. These are usually made in 14 karat gold. Rolex made these from the 40s to the 50s, and these are thin watches with a hand wound movement, and they have no desirability. They are cased by an outside company other than Rolex. It could be a D&G, it could be a D&W. They're gonna have the Rolex stamp, but they weren't cased by Rolex, so they have third-party casings, and these watches are not desirable at all. So, like I said, if you want your money to be there, don't buy these watches. If you do, make sure you pay appropriately for them. Other watch, square Rolex from the 70s and 80s that are weird designs. These were done like this, or maybe something like this, with ladies in mind, and even men's watches that had some weird designs, weird cases, integrated bracelets. These watches are not desired at all. Luckily, they're made of gold, so you could rescue some of your money in the gold, but not all of it. And even though they have the Rolex name, they're not desirable at all. And Rolex is not the only one that made these watches. These watches were made by Patek. These watches were made by Vacheron. These watches were made by everybody in the late 70s, early 80s. But they have no collectability and no desirability. So everything you buy and sell, if there's it's about desirability out there. If nobody wants them, of course you're not going to make any money on them, and you're going to be scrapping them. I've done it a few times where I've got to get rid of them, and the only way to get out of them is with the gold content. Other watch, sad to say, vintage Art Deco. These vintage Art Deco watches with the cushion case, with the tank or square case, they are very, very difficult to sell. Very difficult to sell. And I've seen a few people want outrageous amounts of money, so I hate, if you're one of these, I hate to break it to you, but there's no market for this type of watches right now. Like I said, Rolex, it's all about the oyster case, and the sports model, it's not about the Art Deco. Even in the older ones, like a date or a Datejust, any year of those, you could sell them automatic or the early hand wound Rolex date. There's a large market for those, but these Art Deco, there there's no there's no collectability in them, even with the name, and there's no gold in them either. So, I mean, it's it's a no-win situation with these. So these are one of the watches, guys, that if you have one, you best hold on and see if the market for the vintage turns a little bit. See if you could get something better for it. The last watch that I'm going to talk about. This is a very popular Rolex that you cannot sell for nothing. There's zero desirability, zero collectability on this watch. And that is the Rolex Cellini. Other people call it Cellini. I grew up calling it Cellini. So the Rolex Cellini, it is a watch that has zero collectability out there. And the again, you're lucky these watches are made in gold. Most of the vintage Cellinis have the integrated bracelet. So they were made of solid 18 karat gold, and they do have a few $1,000s worth of gold, but that's about it. They have a thin Piaget looking movement, not a high quality movement, even though it's a Rolex movement. It is a watch that nowadays it would be a lady's watch with the integrated bracelet, but even just to size those watches, it was so hard. It was a watch that if you saw one and it fit you, and it was like a perfect match, then it was a watch for you. But if you had to go and resize those watches, it was basically impossible. Back in the day, the way we used to resize those watches to fit other people, we would do it by the clasp. We wouldn't do it by the band. There was no way of adding to the band. We would just put a longer square on the clasp, so it could come around, and you would have a clasp, a real long clasp at the bottom, and that's the way we used to make these watches longer or shorter. But it was just basically a ugly job. It didn't seal. The bracelet wouldn't seal all the way completely because there was no way of sizing these watches. What other people used to do too is cut the bracelet off and put lugs in there so they could put a band. And there was some people that used to do a good job, but that's not an easy job to do. Because if those lugs are not aligned perfectly, if those lugs were just a little bit cockeyed, a little bit out of center, you would have your 12 o'clock not match where it was supposed to go. So these watches were just a total design disaster. So these are the watches, guys, that I wouldn't buy right now, and I would suggest you guys not to buy it because they have no collectability, even though they're Rolex. So guys, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share, and subscribe. And I thank you so very much. I'll catch you guys on the next one.